Here's something nobody told you when you got your first job. The 40-hour work week isn't a law of nature. It's not in the Constitution. It wasn't handed down from some mountain. Nobody found it written on a clay tablet. At some point, a group of human beings sat in a room and decided that this was the number, 40, and that it would take until 1938 for the federal government to agree, and another decade after that for it to actually apply to everyone. And even then, not quite everyone. The average American full-time worker today logs around 43 hours a week. Salaried workers, the ones who got the promotion, the ones who made it, clock even more. Roughly 1 in 5 Americans works more than 60. We talk a lot about what workers have won, but what we don't really talk about is what winning actually looks like, and that sometimes winning is still losing. Every right you have as a worker, somebody bled for it. This is labor pains. Let's go back, not to some mythologized golden age, because there wasn't one, but back to 1886, back to when the American workday was 12 hours long, 6 days a week, and the conversation about what that was doing to people was just beginning to get loud enough that the people doing it to them were starting to get nervous. May 1st, 1886. 340,000 workers across the country went on strike in a single day. They wanted one thing: 8 hours of work, 8 hours of rest, and 8 hours of whatever the hell they wanted. It was called the 8-Hour Day Movement, and it was, by any measure, the largest coordinated labor action in American history up to that point. For one bright moment, it looked like it might actually work. 3 days later, on the evening of May 4th, a group of workers and labor organizers gathered at Haymarket Square. The rally was winding down. It had been peaceful. The mayor of Chicago had attended and gone home satisfied there was no trouble. Then, someone threw a bomb. To this day, no one knows who. 7 police officers died. 4 workers were executed. 8 men were convicted on the strength of what any reasonable person, then or now, would call a theory. The 8-hour movement didn't just lose momentum. It was buried under it. The bomb at Haymarket became a masterclass in narrative control. The story of workers who wanted basic human dignity became the story of dangerous radicals who wanted to blow things up. The 8-hour day went back underground. It would not resurface, not seriously, not federally, for 52 years. Here's where Henry Ford comes in, and where it gets interesting, because Ford was about to become one of history's greatest accidental heroes. Thanks to him, in 1926, the Ford Motor Company adopted the 5-day, 40-hour work week. Now, Henry Ford was not a progressive. He was not a humanitarian. He was, by most accounts, a deeply unpleasant man with some genuinely alarming political views that we don't have time for today. But he understood one thing very clearly. His workers couldn't afford to buy his cars. Ford's logic was cold and simple. A worker who only has Sunday off doesn't take vacations, doesn't go on road trips, doesn't need a car for, well, much of anything. But a worker with a weekend, now you're talking. Armed with that realization, he did what no union or workers' rights organizations could previously accomplish. He shortened the work week to sell more product. The labor movement spent decades fighting for something Ford, more or less, gave his workers because it was good for his bottom line. That's either deeply cynical or deeply funny. Maybe both. Probably both. The irony compounds when you learn that Ford was simultaneously running one of the most aggressive union-busting operations in American industry. He actually had a private security force called the Service Department, led by a man named Harry Bennett, whose job was to intimidate, surveil, and, wait for it, physically assault union organizers. Ford's workers got their 40 hours, and free black eyes for trying to organize for anything else. Hell of a bonus. Thanks, boss. By the 1930s, the conversation had changed. The Great Depression had a way of clarifying things. A quarter of the American workforce was unemployed. The ones who still had jobs were working longer hours for less money because the ones who didn't were desperate enough to take whatever was offered. The race to the bottom has always been easier to win when hunger is the competition. Enter Frances Perkins. If you don't know that name, this is where we fix that. Frances Perkins was Franklin Roosevelt's Secretary of Labor, the first woman ever to hold a cabinet position in the United States government. She was also the person who, more than almost anyone else, actually built the architecture of what we now call workers' rights in America. Yeah, a real American badass. She not only watched the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory burn in 1911, she was actually standing on the street when workers, mostly young immigrant women, jumped from the 9th floor windows because the exits were locked. That moment made her. She spent the next 30 years making sure it wouldn't happen again. In 1938, Perkins helped shepherd the Fair Labor Standards Act into law. It established the federal minimum wage. It regulated child labor. And it enshrined the 40-hour work week, with time and a half required for anything beyond it, as federal law. It was a genuine, hard-won victory. It also came with a clause that doesn't get talked about anywhere near enough. Agricultural workers were excluded. Domestic workers were excluded. Both categories in 1938 were overwhelmingly black workers. A direct result of political compromise with Southern Democrats who made clear they would not support any legislation that extended federal labor protections to the people who worked their fields and cleaned their houses. The 40-hour week arrived in America for some people, but for the people who needed it most, they were just written out. Not a bug, a feature, and a calculated one at that. The post-war years brought the 40-hour workweek into the mainstream, at least for white-collar workers, at least for the newly minted American middle class, at least for the people in the commercials. And for a moment, a genuinely beautiful, if historically brief moment, American workers had more leisure time than at any point in the country's history. People went places. They built things. They read. They sat on their front porches and let the evening happen to them. The economists of the time assumed it would only get better. John Maynard Keynes had predicted in 1930 that by century's end, we'd be working 15 hours a week because technology would handle the rest. Thanks, Nostradamus. What actually happened is that productivity doubled, then tripled, and then the gains went somewhere. Just not to the workers who generated them. Between 1979 and 2025, worker productivity in the United States grew by over 90%, while compensation for the typical worker grew by only 33%. And that is how you make math depressing. The 40-hour week held as a legal standard, but the definition of work got creative. Salary exemptions, gig classification, the slow migration of the job into the phone that never leaves your pocket, the email you answer at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday because you're not sure what happens if you don't. Nobody took your 40 hours. They just made 50 feel like a choice. If that feels far too normalized for comfort, surprise! Here's where we take a little trip. In Denmark, the average worker logs about 37 hours a week. In the Netherlands, it's 32. In Germany, it's 34. These are not lazy countries. Germany is the 4th largest economy on Earth. Denmark has one of the highest rates of entrepreneurship in the world. The Netherlands produces more food per capita than almost any other nation. They also consistently rank among the happiest countries on Earth. The United States? We rank 24th in the World Happiness Report. Not 4th 20 times running, 24th. Behind most of Western Europe, behind Canada, behind Australia, behind a dozen countries where people work fewer hours, take more vacation, and in many cases, earn less in raw wages, but more in the things wages are supposed to buy. Time, health, stability, the ability to watch your kid's school play without checking your phone? The argument that's always made is that American productivity depends on American work culture. That we grind because we grow. That the hustle is the engine. The data, with regret, does not back this up. Overworked people make more mistakes. They get sick more. They quit more. They innovate less. The research on this is not subtle. What the American Workweek protects is not productivity. It's the idea that your value as a human being is determined by your output. It's the notion, absorbed so early most of us can't find where we got it, that the rest is something you earn, not something you're owed. A few years ago, the new president of the United Auto Workers, a guy named Shawn Fain, was going through old issues of the union's magazine from the 30s and 40s. He found something that stopped him. UAW members had been fighting for a 32-hour work week back then. The assumption at the time was that the fight would continue, that 40 hours was a waypoint, not a destination. 80 years later, Fain said, our leadership was agreeing to 7-day, 12-hour schedules. In 2023, the UAW struck the big three automakers for 6 weeks. Won significant raises, better benefits, cost of living adjustments. They did not win the 32-hour week. The fight that started in 1886, 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will, is still being fought. The numbers changed. The argument didn't. So, workers fought for the 8-hour day, died for it, literally, at Haymarket in 1886, won something in 1938 that was never quite what they'd asked for, then watched the gains slowly, quietly, legally erode for the next 8 decades. The 40-hour work week is real. It exists. It was a genuine victory pulled from the people who did not want to give it. But it was never the finish line. The people who fought for 8 hours weren't fighting for 8 hours. They were fighting for the right to have a life that wasn't owned by someone else from sunup to sundown. They were fighting for the idea that labor is not the sum total of a person. That there are hours in the day that belong to you, to your family, your community, your own wandering mind. Some of those hours, we got. A lot of them, well, they're still being negotiated.